I guess I better read it in English. It says, Christ suffered for sins once and for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order that he might lead you, textual variant there, to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but having been made alive in the spirit. And then chapter 19, then the next verse says, En ho kai tois en phulake pneumasi paruthes ekheruxen, in which also he preached, having gone forth, he preached to the spirits who are in prison. Boyer and others, including Harris, have proposed emendations at this point because, for grammatical reasons, but also because they think that, in fact, it might be a mistake, that, in fact, this is talking about the old early Christian tradition about Enoch, who was preaching the preaching of Enoch, according to some of the apocryphal materials. So, I mean, it strikes me that that's a plausible place where you might need an emendation.
So, what percentage do you believe of the New Testament is impacted by viable meaning textual variants?
I've never put a percentage on something like that because I'm not sure that percentage actually means anything. I mean, for example, if I speak a sentence in 100 words and I change only one of the words, but the word that I change is whether I say the word not or not, the entire sentence is reversed in meaning. Well, it'd only be a 1% change, but it'd be really important. So I don't think percentages. I've never really tried to calculate percentages because I don't think they matter.
You have often said that there are verses where variants change the meaning of an entire book. Could you give us some examples?
A verse of changing an entire book. Yeah, sure. I think that I actually do think that if Hebrews 2:9 said that Jesus died apart from God, that there is no place in Hebrews then where Jesus is said to have died by the grace of God. And that the meaning now, I think, for Hebrews means that Jesus died like a full flesh and blood human being without any divine comfort or support. If the reading is not chorus theou, but charis theou, that he died by the grace of charati theou, he died by the grace of God, then in fact you do have the teaching that Jesus' death was an act of divine grace in Hebrews, which otherwise you don't have.
And yet when you argued that point in the Orthodox corruption of Scripture, did you not argue that chorus theou is consistent with the theology of Hebrews?
Yeah, the variant changes it.
How can you argue that it's consistent with the theology of Hebrews if
I'm not saying
variant
chorus.
changes it?
I'm saying that charis, depending on which variant you have, the meaning of the book changes.
So nowhere else in the book do you have this idea of Jesus' death that would be presented in Hebrews 2:9 based upon reading one 10th century manuscript and Origen's manuscripts, at least some of Origen's manuscripts. You said the majority, but I don't know where Origen actually said that.
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
So your assertion then is that the book of Hebrews would not present that view of the atonement of Jesus unless you have that reading in Hebrews 2:9. Elsewhere, it just doesn't.
Nowhere else does Hebrews say that Jesus died by the grace of God. This is the one place.
I understand that, but you believe that the original is chorus because that is consistent with the writing of Hebrews, with the theology of Hebrews.
And the variant changes that.
Away from it. Okay, I understand what you're saying. On the Unbelievable radio program in London, you discussed the length of time that exists between the writing of Paul's letter to the Galatians and the first extant copy, that being 150 years. You described this time period as enormous. That's a quote. Could you tell us what term you would use to describe the time period between, say, the original writings of Suetonius or Tacitus or Pliny and their first extant manuscript copies?
Very enormous.
Sort of ginormous would be a good one?
Ginormous.
Ginormous, okay.
Ginormous doesn't cover it. The New Testament, we have much earlier attestation than for any other book from antiquity. What you can't do is then say, well, then you can't trust any book from antiquity. Okay, yes, right, that's right.
So,
that's right.
So it would be correct to write a book called Misquoting Suetonius?
Absolutely. Scholars do this.
And
scholars write books all the time about how you don't know about what Plato actually wrote, or what Homer wrote, or Suetonius, or Tacitus, Euripides. This is just what scholars do. Of course, there are scads of books on just these topics.
And so when you cite them in your works, you will say according to the best sources, and we'll question the reliability of Suetonius or Gospel of Thomas, whatever else it might be.
There's no scholar who's an expert in Suetonius or Cicero or the Gospel of Thomas who would tell you that we absolutely know what these texts originally said.
So when you say know what these texts originally said, but they will believe that we have a sufficiently clear knowledge to quote Suetonius. You quote Suetonius, don't you?
Yes, of course I quote the manuscript tradition of Suetonius. I mean, it's just understood among scholars what you're quoting.
And so you say in your books, I'm not really quoting Suetonius, this isn't really what he said?
I'm saying that we don't have the original text for any writing from the ancient world. The New Testament is no different. Just as you can't establish the original text of the New Testament because you don't have sufficient evidence, you can't establish the original text of Suetonius because you don't have original evidence. For some of these authors, the manuscript tradition is pathetic. I mean, for some very important works from antiquity, we have one manuscript that's a palimpsest. And so, yes, absolutely, we have exactly the same problem. And when you say that, nobody goes on about the Gospel of Thomas, absolutely wrong. Scholars of the Gospel of Thomas talk about this all the time. I mean, this is a major issue of scholarship.
I'm sorry, I didn't say that they don't discuss such things, sir, but anyway. Peter Williams of Cambridge suggested that if you were to edit an edition of the Greek New Testament using all your own decisions regarding textual variants, that it would differ less from the Nessiol and UBS platform than the Textus Receptus does. Would you agree?
Yes.
So you would say if you included all of your own readings, such as, depending on Codex Bezae and Mark 141, for the reading of anger, would you put that in your text?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. And yet the resultant text would be less different than the King James is from the New American Standard if it was translated?
I'm sorry, you lost me there because I thought we were talking about Greek.
Well, yes, but I'm trying to give an illustration to the people in the audience. The King James is translated from the TR. The New American Standard is translated from the NA27, or actually NA25, I think the last one was 26. But the point is that the differences in readings would be less than you have if you're sitting there with a King James versus a New American Standard.